Today, fire investigators made a confirmation that came as no surprise to Late News Tonight viewers. CAL FIRE has determined that the Camp Fire, the deadliest and most destructive fire in state history, was indeed started by PG&E power lines. It echoes what we first reported 2 weeks ago when our Brandon Ritteman spoke to the district attorney in Butte County.
We're confident as to how the fire started. The why is what we're looking at right now.
Look at this. Just hours ago, PG&E issued this very brief statement saying CAL FIRE announced today that it has determined PG&E electrical transmission lines near Polga were a cause of the Camp Fire. PG&E accepts this determination. Well, our Brandon Ritteman has been answering your questions all evening on Facebook. He'll tackle some of your top questions in just a moment. But keep in mind, this all comes as families who were displaced by the Camp Fire are now finally getting help from the feds. FEMA is now opening up several temporary housing sites.
So this is it.
After months of living out of a hotel and being separated from her children, Melissa Kreibel's family is looking forward to some much-needed stability.
I'm out of a motel room. I get to cook dinner, go grocery shopping.
Okay, we need to go really fast. Really fast. You see the fire, baby?
That scary recording is from the day Melissa says her life was turned upside down. She lost her home and much of her hometown during the Camp Fire. Federal emergency management authorities opened this site in Oroville that will house 40 families displaced by the Camp Fire. Survivors will live in this temporary housing unit, but while this new site opening is being considered a success, FEMA says they are just getting started.
Got a long way to go yet, so while we've got this site up and running, we're looking ahead at the other sites that we've got to work on. So we're definitely excited about this one, but we still are driving full steam ahead.
This is the now growing list of FEMA housing sites. We promised that we would not forget the many survivors who more than 6 months later are still trying to find a reliable place to rest each night. And again, with today's news confirming that PG&E is responsible for this destructive fire, we want to get to Brandon Ritteman now, who has been tracking many of your questions. Things like, will PG&E face criminal charges?
Turns out a lot of you had something to say about this development here. Mary Elise says maybe if CEOs were held personally responsible for the really big mistake, like the fires, they would make better decisions. Mary Elise, that's a really interesting point you raised because PG&E has already been convicted of a half-dozen federal felonies, but guess what? No one can go to prison for those because no one is personally named in those charges. They charged the company with crimes and convicted them, but not any individual people in it. It's way too early to say whether there's going to be criminal charges out of the Camp Fire. I talked to the DA a couple of weeks ago up in Butte County, and he said they're looking into whether any charges might be applicable, maybe as serious as manslaughter, and they are looking to see if there's anybody specifically they can pin charges on if they do find evidence of a crime. But again, they haven't gotten that far yet. In a similar vein, Mary Jane says, charge the CEOs with murder. All right, so we just talked about the possibility of manslaughter charges. Murder actually was a theory that the state AG's office said would be possible for this fire if a crime occurred. They were asked that question by the federal judge overseeing PG&E's probation in its case out of federal court in San Francisco. However, to get to murder, you've got to prove that somebody at PG&E knew people were probably going to die and they said, go ahead and do this thing wrong anyway. The likelihood that there even exists some evidence like that is pretty small, so don't hold your breath. But again, the DA up in Butte County is saying they are actively looking into whether there's evidence to support possible manslaughter charges against the company and possibly executives if they find it. And then Tracy says instead of more or bigger fines, they need to mandate power lines be put underground. Tracy, it's a really good point that you raise, but the cost of putting power lines underground is something like 10 times as much as what it costs to put them above ground. That being said, utilities, including PG&E, are looking at system hardening measures that include insulating the lines. That's a lot cheaper than burying them. A lot of the power lines you see out in the world are just bare metal sitting up there on those poles, and they're more vulnerable when a tree blows into them, for instance, in high wind. That, by the way, is not what is believed to have happened in the Camp Fire. That was on a transmission line, those big, tall steel towers that you see out there. They're taller than the trees. PG&E says, though, that it had a hook up on that line that appears to have been worn through in the metal when they found it in the damage. and that may have played a role in allowing sparks to fall onto the ground there.